Hello, everybody. This is Vani Kola, founder and managing director of Kalaari Capital. Kalaari Capital is an early stage venture capital firm based in Bangalore, India. You're listening to Trust Me, I Know What I'm Doing.
My name is Abhay Dandekar, and I share conversations with talented and interesting individuals linked to the global Indian and South Asian community. It's informal and informative, adding insights to our evolving cultural expressions, where each person can proudly say, "Trust me, I know what I'm doing."
Welcome, everyone, to this episode of Trust Me, I Know What I'm Doing. We connected earlier this year in person, but it's lovely to connect here on the podcast. Vani, thank you so much for joining us. A warm introduction to Vani Kola this morning here in California, but this evening in Bangalore.
Yes, and good morning to you, good evening to me. Happy to be here together.
You know, I wanted to start with something. Most who know me very well know that my mornings are usually punctuated, no matter what, with Surya Namaskar and some decaf coffee. So
Yeah.
I have to ask you, as someone who's enjoyed some success and also has had a long journey in that success, being it morning here and evening there for you, do you have any particular routines or rituals that drive you or govern you in that way?
So life is a ebb and flow. And I am 61 this year. So I'm all about routines and rituals.
Okay.
So my mornings for many decades now starts with a meditation and maybe a small or a big chunk of time, small being maybe 15 to 20 minutes, big chunk could be 45 to an hour of some form of exercise. But talking about ebb and flow, for the last 3 months or so, I've had a knee issue that I've been struggling with. So my mornings have started with physiotherapy every single day. And that has made it so much more better. And I think, as ludicrous as it might sound, at 61, I know my body and names of muscles I didn't know existed.
Right, exactly.
Right? So I think while it's good to have routines and rituals, life also changes and you have to change with that. So now I've been doing my physio first and my meditation next, and then getting ready to go to work. So that has been my routine most days in the morning. And my evenings, is usually like I'm doing right now, talking to you, having my herbal tea, and then getting off screen around 10 o'clock, 10:30, reading a book, getting to bed.
You know, those routines, like you mentioned, the ebb and flow, is it important for you to have a routine to ensure that there's some anchors in your day, especially to feel as if there is some purpose and meaning, regardless of the quote unquote productivity part?
Yeah, I mean, my kids are now grown and live on their own, obviously. But I remember every single day dropping them to the bus stop to take their school bus. We live in India, so there are school buses. And, was a ritual that was between 7 a.m. and 7:15. So then the morning routine had to be slightly different, right? So breakfast for the kids,
Right.
getting them to the bus stop, and then me heading off to work. So my morning started much earlier because I needed to get my exercise and my meditation done before the kids got up. So I was like a 5:30 a.m., 5 a.m. person to just make it all work. So I think your life stages change. Routines are very important, but not feeling resentful about your routines versus the routines actually empowering you, I think,
Yeah.
and giving you meaning is important, which means, you have to find some flexibility and grace for yourself and make it joyful, the routines, versus something that, start your morning as burdensome or resentful.
Sure, sure. And I think you're right that unburdening that comes from the routine is only as good as how much grace you allow yourself for those ebbs and flows. You know, Kobe Bryant, the famous basketball player, the late famous basketball player,
Yes.
he once commented that he never ever got bored with the basics.
Mm.
And, that always struck me, especially in thinking about those routines that just seem so, again, routine, and they're basic, and they tend to anchor us a little bit. I'm curious what basic skills or values particularly serve as those anchors in a day-to-day problem solving universe that could really have so many surprises embedded in there. Are there particular basic things that you particularly, again, just like Kobe, never get truly bored of?
Well, like I said, I never get bored of my meditation because it allows me to have a centered perspective, good day, bad day, grateful for the good day. And, if you feel you had a bad day, to know that there is going to be a better day, and just to not let anything get to you too seriously, right? And I think that centeredness of being more even keel, I think, and also just that pause before you
Mm,
react to
yeah.
something and embedding that into life. I think we are quick to react, and the impact of that can be small or big depending on how often and in what virtuosity we bring that into our life. So and the basics to me are really having dinner with the family almost every day, right? And without distractions, without TV. We've never had TV in our dining room for all the years and still don't. So I think, just to me, I think being present, I think that is the basic, being present to whatever I'm doing, to be just mindful of how I am taking in my day.
Yeah.
That's important to me. That's the basic.
For someone who's a athlete, right? They practice this quite a bit. They spend time perfecting a jump shot or a dribble in the basketball world. As a leader in the venture capital and tech world, and as someone who leads teams, did that ability to stay engaged and present in the moment, does that take practice? Do you have to remind yourself of that on a daily basis? Are there methods that you use, particularly at work, that are recentering or repurposing yourself so that you're reminded of that sort of central value of staying present in the moment?
I'm somebody who nature nurture, at some point it's very hard to draw a line because something becomes second nature somewhere. And you see a gymnast with a big leap and it looks so easy, or
Right,
whatever, right? That may be, and that comes from years of practice and skill. So I think some point things become your nature, and maybe at some point they were nurtured, perhaps, right? Some of it you nurture consciously, some of it perhaps you don't nurture so consciously. Like family dinners was not something I nurtured consciously because it was what I grew up with, what I really cherished, and
Yeah.
it was just a tradition that came easy. We didn't have to work hard as a family to do that. Maybe for someone else that has to be nurtured, and maybe over time it becomes nature. But to me, I'm a fairly organized person. Can of course be flexible because the day may demand that at times, but I calendar my week, I calendar my day, my to-dos. If I'm going to take a break to exercise or meet a friend for coffee, I calendar that. If I'm going to go to a movie, I calendar that. So I
Yeah.
kind of tend to be a planned person. Now, again, it works for my profession and for my career and my personal time that I also cherish better to be very, very calendared. Maybe it doesn't work for an artist. Maybe they
Right.
need to be inspired by the moment. I don't know.
Yeah.
Right. Since I am not one. But the calendaring, though, is, the process I use. It has three buckets. I know I couldn't plan for this, but it needs my time now. Now
Mm,
may not be this minute, maybe today or this week, but it wasn't already planned. So I have to make room for that. But I might have a talk I have to give a month from now, and it could be a talk I'm very familiar with. Then I know I don't have to spend a lot of time preparing. So I just maybe schedule half an hour somewhere to prepare that. But it may be on a completely new topic. And then I calendar myself the research time, the preparation time, that,
all that.
right?
Yeah.
It's the same thing. There might be a trip coming up. Maybe I need only little time to pack, or it's the kind of trip that I need more time to pack. It goes into
Right.
the calendar.
Yeah.
So, and same thing goes for reading time. I have a meeting coming up. I'm meeting a founder. They are building something in the space economy. They've sent me some material. reading that, being prepared before going into the meeting, right? So I have that meeting tomorrow. So, so I look at my work and I tend to maybe not get as flustered because I try to land everything as much as possible in a way that I'm prepared. And
Yeah.
in some ways, even curiosity and boredom gets calendared, as in I put down blank times. That may be
Yeah.
my time that I write, blog, because I can't say I'll write this article in next 30 minutes. At least I don't work that way. Maybe writers can do that. So I just say, oh, I need 3 hours of writing time. So let's see
Yeah.
what I can come up with. So it is unstructured, but structured into allowing me that time, right? And I like to read a lot. So as we just talked, I usually leave my before going to bed time open to allow me to read, unless it's reading for a meeting, in which case, I have to read a big report or whatever, then I schedule time that I do that. So I don't know if
Mm.
that's helpful, but I just tend to be someone who works well. And I think this is over time that I've gotten to a point where I like to be very organized about my work.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that, that calendaring actually serves again, no matter what, whether it's having some flexibility with some free space in there, but it's built into there. So it allows some architecture for how you can think as well. And it sounds like, particularly with that, utilizing a practice for this, and it gets better over time or it even changes over time. If that's the anchor, I'm curious if that's the thing that grounds your day, grounds your work, grounds your system, if you will. I'm curious about sometimes the buoys, right? Those things that actually help you float in a very nimble way with the ability to then calibrate and flex up and down or even lead, therefore, with empathy. Because again, you can't necessarily always stick to the calendar. Are there some ways that you, even whether it's managing your time or even managing processes or people that serve, are there some things that serve as buoys for that you are reminding yourself of the nature of that flexibility and sometimes the fact that things always don't go the way that you want to?
Yeah, we are living in India and not in Switzerland, so things don't work on time. So
Yeah.
now, you allow for some buffers. So, right? So you kind of allow for some buffers, whether that is traffic or this or that or whatever, right? If I'm flying, I would rather get to the airport and make those impromptu calls or read up what I need to read up, but allow for that flexibility so I'm not rushed. And I read of a recent TikTok trend that is about how little time you need to spend in the airport or whatever. That would never be me, right? So I
Right.
like to plan buffers, right? So that helps always, right? And so it's not that you calendar yourself by the minute, but you have to
Yeah.
provide buffers. And
Sure.
sometimes, despite everything, you or others, can't always make things work. And you look at whether that's chronic and whether that's something that's genuine, in which case, of course, the empathy, and you can always find flexibility. You can never be a slave of any routine or any ritual. They're just kind of like a lane, right? You're driving, there is a lane, but there is a construction obstruction. So you have to sort of, both sides of the traffic have to use the same lane and you may
Sure.
accommodate for that. So,
Yeah.
you also have to have the somewhat of like we already used the word, giving yourself grace and some humor. I think humor helps a
Mm.
lot. And
Yeah.
if you live in India, so many things go as not so planned,
Right.
not as you planned,
Yeah.
then you need to have a little bit of a dark humor to allow for those to not rattle you so much.
I wonder if, particularly connecting with whether it's investors or other business leaders, particularly about that dark humor, do those connections sometimes help in some ways for landing on a particular meeting spot and finding common ground, and even in some ways that empathy that goes into negotiating to a middle somehow? Has that been something that you found to be very helpful, especially when developing relationships?
Think when developing relationships, to me, it's about authenticity, right? Somehow we are all wired to spot something that isn't genuine quite easily. There is something
Mm.
about body language and body chemistry, and I know there's a lot of research on this. And the only person usually who's fooling themselves is probably the person who, you know, isn't aware that they are not truly bringing their authentic self, right?
Mm.
I think in building relationships, whether you're negotiating or whether you're trying to find that common ground, It's really, when I say authentic self, it's a combination of having the courage to just own it up, and the communication on how do you tune in to the other person and how do you share this in a way that they have ability to also receive it, right? So there is there is both expressing and there is receiving. So again, for me as a receiver, let's say you showed up an hour late and I'm, you know, sitting here, but pausing just to hear you out, right? And make the best of that situation in that moment is all that, you can do. But that pause becomes important, and pause can be cultivated. Pause can become your second nature. But so many times, just that pause to genuinely hear the person has saved me, in a manner of speaking, saved me from doing or saying something that I would have regretted. That's what I
Mm,
mean, right?
mm, yeah.
But likewise, to communicate, I think, is also important. And all of us almost always tend to not take responsibility. And oftentimes, it's just that communication of what you want to share with the other person. There is a combination of being genuine, but also being mindful about what you're saying, and the tonality, and how you're saying it, that makes a situation manageable or toxic.
That spirit of authenticity and understanding the genuine nature of someone by in fact leading with empathy and having that pause, I think they all flow into each other. I'm curious about one particular aspect of, the nature of some of the people that you certainly interact with, and that is thinking about ambiguity. When particularly startup entrepreneurs have, they have to have enough passion and resolve to take a problem solving vision and manage through many ambiguous steps. But for you as a funder and someone who often holds some of those levers of capital and power in a way, how do you deal with ambiguity now versus much earlier in your career?
Ambiguity is a part of business. It doesn't actually matter whether it's a startup or a large company. Let's say you're running a large company today,
Yeah.
healthcare company, since you're a pediatrician. You don't know how, let's say, the onset of AI might change medicine. Let's just take that. And if you are a hospital administrator, you probably need to think about it,
Sure,
right?
right.
And robotic surgery or whatever it is, right? So there are a lot of things always changing. Maybe in some industries, not as fast, in other industries, fast. So there is ambiguity to the very nature of life and ambiguity to the very nature of business, right? And when you don't, Andy Grove, one of my favorite leaders, now of course passed away, his book, The Paranoid Survive, really talks about being able to be a leader in a world of ambiguity, because ambiguity is ever present, right? Always. We just sometimes lull ourselves into thinking that we know everything. So I don't think, particularly for a venture capitalist, ambiguity is more or less necessarily. If you start with the assumption ambiguity is given, okay? So I don't think it's about that. How I might deal with things today a little better than I dealt with before is, um, trying to assess clarity of something in you versus the clarity of the same thing in me. Let
Mm,
me explain.
yeah.
You know, a founder who isn't very clear about, not at the uh, 100 feet level, but at their 1,000 feet level. What are they doing? Why are they doing? Why will they keep doing this? Their true motivations and agenda, right? Which, if ambiguity is inevitable, then what do you need? You need flexibility, you need resilience, you need conviction, you also need ability to take feedback, you need to be able to pivot, you need decision making skills. So these are all skills that there is no score for. There's nobody scorecarding these
Yeah.
necessarily. And they're not even skills that are unfortunately necessarily taught from a educational institution perspective, even if you go to the best MBA school, right? So assessing And I find that these softer skills make a very big difference to people's ability to handle ambiguity. And it's not my ability to handle ambiguity as much as it's their ability to handle ambiguity, right?
Sure, sure.
And so, and that's what I'm trying to study for beyond all the other things. What is the product? What's the market? Beyond all that, the leadership quality of ability to manage through inevitability of change and chaos, which is given. We may not know where and when the curveball comes, but are you able to do that? So I hope I am better able to assess that today than I could before.
Is that glide path towards being able to be both responsible and flexible with clarity and those softer skills that you mentioned, is that perhaps the best way to age not only as a leader, but particularly, I'm just curious, how do you find yourself aging gracefully as a venture capitalist?
Aging gracefully in any aspect, venture capitalist or otherwise, I think is really more about allowing for failures, right? And we use this word grace and, just not getting personal with things
Mm, yeah,
and letting relationships be more than transactions, right?
right.
So maybe it comes with a little bit more patience, a little bit more depth of understanding of human nature and the strength and the flaws that is embedded into being human, if you will,
Yeah, yeah.
and not getting too personal with
Mm.
those things.
Sure. And in that ability to again let go of ego and really understand the value of those skills of not taking things personally, I wonder if the same sort of rules apply everywhere. They're ubiquitous, whether in your personal space, your professional space. But I think that those ring true, particularly aging anywhere. You and I, when we met recently at a conference, we were focused on a discussion about tech and particularly guardrails of tech. And thinking about letting go of your personal ego sometimes it can be very difficult when it comes to the guardrails of tech and innovation and entrepreneurship. I'm curious how, when you focus on the guardrails of tech, allowing stakeholders in any given, ecosystem to then level up and set that level and find sort of common ground among those guardrails that you set for yourself. Particularly, I mean, we see this in healthcare. This is something that you and I briefly talked about, where those guardrails don't always translate to the same language that we speak sometimes. Can you structure innovation and entrepreneurship with guardrails in mind? Or is that thinking just too prohibitive when you are someone who is designing systems? Again, it does kind of come back to this idea of, are you thinking about yourself and your own ego, or are you thinking about the sort of entire ecosystem and building those guardrails in mind when you start innovating and when you are designing a system that's actually fresh and new? I hope that makes
It,
sense,
got,
by the way.
it makes sense in my own way, because I think the question itself would be superfluous if we didn't associate guardrails with flexibility. We talked about flexibility, but I didn't say that gave you permission to transgress your own moral compass and values. Okay.
Mm,
That's not what
yeah,
flexibility is. So, and letting go of ego doesn't necessarily mean that, you don't have guardrails. I think guardrails are ever present in your life. And the more you are aware of what those are, and they are the true purpose of your life,
yeah,
and you let go of that, then, you're a kite that's flying in the sky with nothing tethering you, right? And who knows where you would land. That's a problem. So, but I have never been a confused person about what my compass and guardrails are. And I think popular, unpopular, at times you have to have the conviction, because you feel so strongly about what that purpose of what you're doing, why you're doing, and you do that. And again, that's not only for my profession. It doesn't matter what profession you are in. Ultimately, professions are just about a path we have chosen, but the walk and what it takes to walk is more or less the same. on any profession that you take. If you have to get to a certain summit, so to speak, in your profession. So when you talk about tech or innovation or health insurance, a very unpopular topic in US or any other, there are so many unpopular topics, but we won't go into that, right?
That's right.
But I think, guardrails are really about what is the cost of profit. And it is something you think in small scope and in large scope. But if you don't think in the small details, you perhaps allow yourself the permission to not think about it in the large details. So let me explain.
Yeah.
So, sometimes you have a founder who's not stating genuine revenue, let us just say, because you want to please the investors, or you have inflated your numbers slightly, and you have inflated it because you want that slightly higher valuation or whatever it is, and you tell yourself the permission that that's okay, right? And or on the other side, let's say me as an investor, I know that there was something wrong this company did, but you say as a board member, maybe that's okay, maybe they'll correct themselves, maybe I don't have to call this out because blah blah blah, Theranos, Elizabeth Holmes, whatever it is, right? So you and I sitting as observers say, what was the board thinking, right? It's not that the signs were never there, right? You just somehow got caught into the hubris, and there was a part of you that knew what was wrong. You didn't call it out, right? And you can look back and regret, you can look back and defend, whatever that might be. But the most important is to reflect, where did my guardrails go? Because we have those from kindergarten. My dog goes into the garden and digs up my vegetables, and when I point it to her, she goes like this. She knows it's wrong. She may be tempted to do it,
Right.
but all of us know what right from wrong.
Right. And I mean, whether it's a kindergartner, whether it's your pet dog, whether it's an investor or a startup person, but if we're not thinking of those guardrails from the very beginning, especially when designing new systems that seem so lovely and problem solving breakthroughs, if you aren't thinking of those guardrails from the outset and your compass is aligned with that, particularly when it comes to society and policymakers there, what do those perhaps policymakers and entrepreneurs and VC individuals perhaps need to learn from each other when thinking about these systems from the outset? I mean, certainly AI is at the forefront of this right now, but are there those kind of moral compass, theoretical compass guardrails that we all need to learn a little bit better from each other is when designing policy, when thinking of investments as venture capitalists?
Wouldn't that be lovely though? Wouldn't that be lovely though? But if we could do all that, there would never have been any revolutions. The serfs would have shared with the peasants, so to speak, right? So, and, there would never be any social changes that were ever needed. But history shows and history repeats, right?
Yeah.
So and sometimes perhaps when you invented fossil fuels, you didn't know truly what was going to happen. Maybe when you invented oxycontin, you probably didn't know. That is not the sin. The sin is that when you knew, you still, for the sake of profit, let whatever fentanyl addiction grow, right? So that is the problem. And tobacco, whatever, sugar, it doesn't matter, but we can learn from that. So expecting these are ebbs and flows of society itself, right? But how does change ever happen? How do good things ever happen? Because somebody, many times at personal cost, stands up. So you talked about AI. 12% of researchers in AI, less than 12% are women, and especially in leadership role, the number goes down. If we are half of the world, is the world that more and more is going to get affected by AI designed by women? We know from the Middle Ages, Dark Ages, if we go back to that, the world was not designed for women, right? So maybe we made progress. Who knows? Maybe we have not. It depends on your point of view. Some days it feels like we made a lot of progress, and other days it feels like we have not made any progress at all. So is AI going to take us back into Dark Ages, or is it creating a better world for the other half, right? So
Yeah.
there are so many interesting models. Are policy makers from just purely the good of their heart going to do the right thing? I don't know. I don't think so generally, right? So there is
I
a
mean, thinking
role
of that,
of,
they need those forward-thinking entrepreneurs, and they need those venture capitalists to actually guide them in a way, and perhaps vice versa, right?
well, I mean, entrepreneurs, venture capitalists, policymakers are all people. Okay, at the end of the day, you are a people too, meaning that whatever requires speaking up, right? Change
Mm,
doesn't always come from power circles, right?
sure,
The
sure,
czar was never going to go and make the world more equitable or whatever, right? So when you have power, you're not necessarily incented to do something for somebody who doesn't have that power. That is feels like an immutable law to me.
yeah,
But I do think I'm an optimist. I couldn't be in my job if I wasn't. And also just by nature, I am a optimist. And so I do believe at the end of the day, the world balances because people speak up and often, and they act for the good of more. And to simply believe that it'll always, it doesn't mean it shouldn't come from power circles, but it doesn't always come from power circles, right? So
yeah,
the conversation on women in AI is as much my responsibility to lead, not because I'm a venture capitalist. That has no power at all in this topic. It's as much your job for the sake of your children or others or whatever, right? So I think the ability to do social good is sometimes not directly related to whether you have power and leverage or not. Power is
sure,
created by taking action.
yeah. Yeah, and in that same spirit, I want to ask you this because India as a global leader in tech and innovation is apparent. That I don't think is in question at all. I'm curious whether or how can India position itself to be a global leader when it comes to governance?
Governance in what aspect, though? Governance from a company, governance from a social equitability, governance in which space?
I think both of those. Governance when it comes particularly from a social equity standpoint, but certainly for companies as well.
I don't know if I can answer this question about social equity for you. I'm not smart enough or vested enough to be able to answer that question because those are no easy solutions
Sure.
to those. So I don't think I'm in particular qualified to answer that. Governance in the scope of a company is a little simpler to
Mm,
answer because we
yeah.
know we can say what governance means and we can say what are the bodies. So, what should good governance be? I don't think there is any dearth of law on that. I think good, reasonable laws exist. I think it's enforceability of that and the due process penalties around that I think can be stronger because you can have speed limits, but if you never get speeding tickets, what is the
Right.
probability you're always going to go at the right speed, right?
Yeah.
Now more and more technology helps because if you cut that red light, there is a camera sitting there and it automatically sends you that automated ticket, right? So maybe you're more compliant. So in order, first you of course need law. Then for compliance to happen, you can't just assume the goodness of a person makes that happen. We know that is definitely not the case, traffic
Sure.
lights, right?
Sure.
But you need enforceability. So I think in India, what we could do more and better is think about enforceability, but because of volume and everything, enforceability perhaps can be enhanced with more technology aiding the compliance of governance.
And is India close to that when it comes to governing companies, especially in the entrepreneurial and tech space?
You answer to me if US is close, when because we just had FTX, right?
Yeah,
So I mean, so can you do something after the fact? Yeah, I think so, and I think different countries have different priorities to enforce that.
sure.
And but can you do it before? That's a very different question because there is always this, power of profit and at what time do you realize that the compromises that are made towards that are simply not acceptable, right?
Mm,
And that
yeah.
therein lies the difficult, cliffhanger of governance at times, right? So that's the problem. And I think all countries, India or otherwise, are not perfect at it. It's issues happen and then you improve the quality of compliance.
Let me ask you this. I mean, you talked about the responsibilities of particularly advancing equity for women. You and I are both parents of daughters, and as women face such an enormous burden, probably more so in some ways with the advance of technology, that inequity that's present. What tangible structural changes would you make, particularly to accelerate power and capital for women in the tech and entrepreneurial spaces that you have lived in now for quite some time?
I think literacy, when I say literacy, I don't mean from just you went into a good high school and you
Right.
did STEM
Right.
or all of that, right? First of all, one good thing is with the changed, of course, it has been slow in coming. But if we think about inheritance laws and go back, let's say 150 years, women all over the world didn't really have financial power. And you change that to what has shifted over the last few decades to, women and financial freedom, both from what they've earned, but also what they have rightfully inherited in India or otherwise in many countries, right? So women have genuinely a voice, comes from that financial freedom that they have. Financial independence, though, is different from financial literacy. So it's another topic that I am very passionate about. How do you enable women to have that financial literacy, right? If you look at equities or structures like, fund managers or
Mm.
VCPE industries, and so they are not present there, right? So, and that has to do with a certain kind of financial literacy that I think we can do more in terms of knowledge, education, networks, skills, right?
Yeah.
Now, in a different aspect of life, also, I think the literacy of knowing your rights, I was in a factory run by women, and this young girl was telling me that in my village, even today, the average age of marriage was 15 or 16. And
Mm.
now that we are working, the average age within 5 years has gone from that to, 23, 25. And it came from some of us going to schools all around the villages telling the girls, legally, you're not supposed to marry till 18 and don't,
Yeah.
because here are all the problems or whatever. So that is a power of literacy, right?
Yeah.
So, and we sit here and we assume that's the way it is all around the world.
Mm.
Even in your own backyard, for example, it isn't always the case, right? So I feel that awareness and literacy is very important. And those are things we can do structurally, right?
Mm.
Even entrepreneurship, right? Oftentimes women don't go into entrepreneurship because there is a certain guilt or fear or burden that comes at the cost of your family, and you would be judged, right? And not for a moment anybody pauses to say, our successful founders, male founders, thinking that comes at the cost of their family and are being judged socially for it, right? And it doesn't have to come at the cost of your family, I suppose. I don't, we can have a philosophical debate on that, but
Right.
later. But so I think that some of these are things we should have conversations about. And I think conversations can shift mindsets. Conversations to shift mindset. I think there are some of these big topics that
Mm.
require more literacy.
Yeah, I mean, that's the motto of this presentation show, that conversation's the antidote to apathy. At some point, we all have conversations about advancing, equity in these spaces of literacy and entrepreneurship, and changing the caliber and the quality, for that matter, of what the structures are for girls and women particularly. I imagine at some point, though, money and execution has to still be the name of the game, because we need action on these kinds of things very desperately, and hopefully those conversations are actually advancing these things. I wanted to ask you about something. Your latest kaleidoscope, which I love, by the way, speaks of nostalgia as a very kind of curious and complex driver in general. So I'm curious what you maybe miss about your time in Silicon Valley.
My hikes at the Stanford Dish or Rancho San Antonio, which were two common haunts, occasionally Mission Peak, they were almost a daily part of my existence. And I miss the easy access to nature. I think
Mm,
California is very lucky to have these open preserves. And when I was there recently, I was down at the Mendocino coast and in the redwoods. And I think nature has always been my therapist, right? Whenever I have a
yeah.
problem, I just get on a hiking trail. 2 hours later, the world looks more beautiful, or at least a better place than when I started out fuming or whatever, sobbing. So I
Hopefully
think,
not too much sobbing.
well, sometimes that has also
Sometimes,
happened,
yeah, that's true.
as it
Yes, they're
happens to all
both
of
good.
us, right?
That's right.
So
That's
whatever
right.
that emotion was, the nature is a great healer. And that's really something I truly, truly miss, the beautiful and easy access to nature that Silicon Valley offered me is what I probably miss the most. And of course, the friends that went with it, and the conversations that flowed in that environment, and the early morning, the soaked earth, and the aroma that was so therapeutic. You can't recreate that in a room with some air freshener.
Right. And I mean, that environment that's around you, hopefully it nurtures a really creative energy and it
Yeah.
sparks lots of activity. We talked a lot this last, few moments and minutes about traits and, soft skills and human qualities that are so critical to, thinking about morality and thinking about equity and thinking about drivers of, how do you organize your day and how do you deal with people. I'm curious for you, what human traits and instincts do you look for, particularly that are critical to build trust in an incredibly AI driven age that we live in and that we're going to continue to live in?
I mean, AI, like anything else, is a tool, right? We are sitting at the cusp of AI, but let's assume for a moment, as I already said, I'm a big reader. I go back into history a lot. I enjoy that. I get immersed into that. Let's say you and I are sitting at the cusp of industrial revolution or whatever. And if you
Mm,
said what allows you to build trust or something, and there were good things that came out of that period, there were some horrible things that happened in that period. Also, child labor, whatever, safety accidents, and many things,
sure. Yeah.
poverty, many things, right? And but trust is slightly different to me. I don't think it is about any technology. I think it is around trust comes from truth. Trust comes from ability to alter your truth, right? So let's say you're a founder and you tell me XYZ, your product, let's take something very simple. My product will be launched in the next 12 months. And I go down into the detail, and I believe, with whatever experience I have, that you have no chance of, launching this in 12 months. Let's just say that, right? Now, that may or may not be material, but how do we have that conversation? Is what
Yeah.
builds, right? Maybe it's
Right.
not 12 months, maybe it's 18 months. It's not make or break to your success, but can there lies in that narrow zone the question of trust. Trust doesn't mean you agree with me or disagree with me. Trust comes from ability to have open, genuine conversation where we are heard and we both understand why we are saying what we are saying, right?
Yeah.
Even if we disagree, right?
Yeah.
I would trust you more because I could have that conversation and I know exactly where you stand and why. And that isn't driven, and that is driven by your truth, not because, your ego didn't allow you to. You, after we speak, let's assume you do know that I am right. And, I gave you very solid reasoning and you are convinced, but you don't want to accept that, right?
Mm,
And when that happens, there is no trust. When, your truth comes from a place of your own conviction and reality that stands proof, then I think trust can exist even if we both stand in on different sides of a
sure.
line, right? But that has nothing to do with AI. That has nothing to do with a venture capital and a founder conversation. That can happen with anything, any profession. I know you're a doctor. My mother was diagnosed with cancer. She passed away. So this is some time back. But, the doctor called me with the diagnosis. It's a different question why the doctor calls me. This is India. The doctor patient relationship is very different. And in
Right.
India, doctors, when it's life threatening, don't tell the patient, they tell the next kin, right?
Yeah.
That somehow feels like you are saving the feelings of the patient. Let's forget whether that's right or wrong. I won't go into that.
Yeah.
But
Boy,
what I
so many
did
of
was,
these queries. Yeah.
yeah, but what I did was the first person I told was immediately my mother, because I know her and trust for her with me to go through this end of life journey, which was inevitable at some point, whether that's 6 months, 12 months, or 24 months, or 36 months. Although we didn't have that much time, it turned out we had, about 12 months in
Sure.
hindsight. But nonetheless, I wanted that journey between me as her caregiver and supporter and enabler and her to be based on trust. And that was based on me not thinking she's a fool or that she doesn't have the courage or whatever. For me, knowing her, it was dependent on me being honest with her every step of the way. And that was just our relationship. Maybe in a different relationship, it's different. So I'm not trying to
Yeah.
be moralistic about it.
No,
But
sure.
trust is one of those things which has nothing to do with technology. It is about two people and how they interact in that zone of truth.
Mm.
And that's what it is.
I love that. I mean, I think honesty is at the core of that, and coming to that understanding builds so much trust.
But honesty, but also listening, right? Because you're
Mm.
as honest as I am, and not on the case of the cancer or whatever, but
Sure, sure.
you're as honest as I am, but we don't agree. Even that is okay. But do we have ability to respectfully understand each other? Then maybe we trust each other.
Yeah, having that open listening channel is huge. Let me get you out of here on this because it's come full circle to, thinking about trust, thinking about all the things that we discussed. But at the end of the day, we started with rituals, and I want to focus on your ritual of meditation for a moment. In the end, what has meditation allowed you to perhaps unlearn about yourself?
Yeah. We there are two things. I've been active meditator daily for maybe about 30 years now, right? And I started the practice to make sense of what felt like chaos in my life. And that came from being a young mother, two career family, me running a company, all of that at that moment felt very chaotic and, and off the rails. And I kind of needed something and so I started heartfulness meditation. But over the years, what I had to unlearn is life doesn't always go by your plan. And it's okay, actually. Wherever my life went off rails, if I look back now, I have no regrets about it because it actually took me to a nice place, another beautiful destination, a destination I didn't know existed, right? So somewhat it's an interesting word, surrendering to the universe, but it can be misconstrued in how you might interpret that. But changing what you can, but embracing what you believe you can't change, right? And going with the flow. There are times in life that you need to go with the flow. And I think that process is not something as humans we are very comfortable with because
Mm.
we are so conditioned to be in control, right? And I think maybe meditation has allowed me to unlearn that I need to be in control at all times and sometimes accept that I'm not in control. It's like in the middle of the stream and I cannot swim upstream. So I have to go with where the stream takes me and, hopefully that works out. So I think that's been probably the most important thing, to let go and accept, and it also opens you to look at opportunities with maybe not trepidation, but with anticipation. And maybe even I feel gives a little bit of freedom to have adventure. Okay. And, when you go off trail, of course, you can get lost, but you could also find that beautiful vista and you'll find your way back on trail, maybe if you have certain, necessary skills. I'm not saying anybody in wilderness should go off trail, but life is a wilderness like that a little bit, right? And so I feel going off trail is something I've learned through
Yeah.
meditation,
Well, it's
figuratively, of course.
of course, right. Well, I was going to say whether it's staying on some wonderful trails and helping to lead lots of people, but then also finding those beautiful vistas that are out there. I think we're all appreciative of it for sure. Vani, thank you so much. This was such a
Yeah.
wonderful conversation, and I hope we can visit with you again down the road.
Thank you, Abhay. This is fun. Thank you. Take care.
You're listening to Trust Me, I Know What I'm Doing. Stay tuned.